Good evening, everybody. Welcome back. This is week 4 of my Lambton College course that I'm recording as I'm teaching the course on campus. As I've shared with you, it's a leadership development course that I'm teaching to first year students in the tourism and hospitality program here at the Ottawa campus. Quick introduction for those who may be jumping onto the course with this particular recording. My name is Manu Sharma. I'm based in Ottawa, the capital of Canada, where I work for one of the largest charities in a senior executive role. Deep interest in talent development, deep interest in strategic design, strategic development, leadership development. I've spent 20 plus years of my life being in all kind of roles as an entrepreneur, as a senior architect, business architect. My background is as an engineer. I have an MBA and an executive program in leadership development from Queen's University. Uh, I coach and mentor a lot of people, very specific interest in youth empowerment. And of late, I've started dabbling in real estate too. So, with that, as always, I'm going to softly remind you to subscribe to the channel. Through this channel, I want to keep on bringing leadership concepts, leadership frameworks, leadership models, management frameworks to everybody who wants to be able to access them without having to worry too much about how you're going to access them. So, आप सबको दोबारा से बहुत बहुत वेलकम. मैं ये कोर्स इंग्लिश और हिंदी की डुअलिटी में बनाता रहूँगा बिकॉज मैं चाहता हूँ कि ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा लोग इसको ले सकें, इसके थ्रू लीडरशिप के कॉन्सेप्ट समझ सकें. सो द फैक्ट कि जो स्लाइड्स हैं वो इंग्लिश में हैं और मैं इंग्लिश और हिंदी के बीच में टॉगल करता रहूँगा, इट एक्चुअली विल मेक अ केस फॉर you being able to follow the course even if you're not very comfortable in English. So, the fourth chapter is on interpersonal communication. As with most stuff in a course like this, a lot of this is going to come across as very commonsensical. You are absolutely allowed to look at some of it and think, well, what's the big deal in it? As I've explained to my students, it comes down to the reason you go through a course like this early on in your life in a leadership program, or I should say, even in a graduate program in a college setting, is because the whole idea is to create a discipline around you consciously using these concepts as you go through your careers. So, कॉमन सेंसिकल तो है, पर ये कोर्स पढ़ाने की इम्पोर्टेंस और इवन पढ़ने की इम्पोर्टेंस इज एस्टैब्लिश बाय द फैक्ट कि कॉमन सेंसिकल होने के बावजूद हम इन सारे कॉन्सेप्ट को कॉन्शियसली अपनी लीडरशिप जर्नी में नहीं लेके आते. मैंने अपने स्टूडेंट्स के साथ में इस चीज़ के बारे में काफ़ी बात की है. द होल आइडिया ऑफ एक्सीडेंटल वर्सेस इंटेंशनल सक्सेस. तो उसमें होता ये है कि इवन दो यू आर एबल टू सी सम सक्सेस विद योर own leadership style, with your own leadership model, because you're not going about it in a very structured way with a plan, and you're not consciously bringing these skills into your leadership journey, it becomes very difficult for you to know what part of that success is coming from the skills, the talent, the practice that you have, and what part of it is coming from just things coming together a certain way. So चांस के ऊपर आप डिपेंड नहीं कर सकते लाइफ में. आपको हर एक चीज कॉन्शियसली बनानी पड़ती है. मोर इम्पोर्टेंटली आपको वो चीज इन अ टेक्निकल लैंग्वेज कम्युनिकेट करने की भी जरूरत होती है. सो यू हैव टू गेट वेरी गुड एट being able to articulate it in a language that is accepted as a professional language by those who are around you, and also those who are globally in that professional domain. So, आज का chapter 4 is on interpersonal communication, and with that we'll jump into it. So this is our journey, which is going to be over the next little while. As I mentioned in the first video, it will be a total of 15 videos. We are on video 4. Even though the chapters would be only for the first 14 videos, I will record one final session, a 15th session, to bring it all together. and to leave you with some very practical calls to action, very practical insights on how you can actually bring it in so that you can start benefiting from it. Ultimately, अगर इस सारे से आपको आपकी जॉब में एडवांटेज नहीं मिलती है, इस सारे से आपको you don't get a leg up on your professional success, the way you present yourself, the way you position yourself, the way you articulate yourself, तो फिर उसका फायदा बहुत कम है. Like वैसे तो फिर तो पढ़ लिया, आगे निकल गए, then what? So moving forward with interpersonal communication, so the chapter is dedicated to the development and enhancement of interpersonal communication skill, underscores the significance of effectively communicating and the fostering of positive interpersonal relations. So as a leader, जो कॉम्स का पार्ट है, कम्युनिकेशन का पार्ट है, वो बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है. इट्स वन ऑफ दोज सॉफ्टर डायमेंशंस ऑफ लीडरशिप which is often ignored, especially for people who come from a technical background. जैसे मैं खुद इंजीनियर था, तो कुछ टाइम लगा, इवन दो कम्युनिकेशन इन जनरल बहुत अच्छा था, इंग्लिश मीडियम स्कूल में पढ़ा था, इंग्लिश काफ़ी अच्छी बोलता था, इवन व्हेन आई लेफ्ट इंडिया वे बैक इन 2000, कॉन्फिडेंटली भी बोलता था. बाय वर्च्यू ऑफ माय एनवायरनमेंट, मेरे पेरेंट्स दोनों एजुकेशनिस्ट थे, बाय वर्च्यू ऑफ माय एनवायरनमेंट, जो हमारी एक्सटेंडेड फैमिली है, they were all very well educated. So by virtue of my environment, जो verbal communication skills थे वो बहुत अच्छे थे, और relatively अच्छे थे. बहुत तो मुझे नहीं बोलना चाहिए, I should be humble about it. तो उसके करके अपने आप को communicate करने में मुझे प्रॉब्लम नहीं होती थी. पर प्रॉब्लम जहाँ पे मैंने early on in my life realize की, अपना व्यू एक्सप्रेस करने में कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं थी. The problem would come when it comes. In terms of how you take other people communication coming to you, or and how do you most importantly carry it. आप लोगों के साथ में अपने आप को तो एक्सप्रेस कर पाते हो, बट लोगों के एक्सप्रेशन को कैसे समझना है, लोगों को ये सेंस ऑफ कंफर्ट एंड कॉन्फिडेंस कैसे देना है कि एज ए लीडर जो भी वो बोल रहे हैं, जो भी वो आपके साथ में कम्युनिकेट कर रहे हैं, आप उसके साथ में रिलेट कर पा रहे हैं, वो आपके लिए इम्पोर्टेंट है. बिकॉज सो मच ऑफ द सक्सेस, द इम्पैक्ट ऑफ योर लीडरशिप इज इन पीपल फीलिंग कंफर्टेबल एंड कॉन्फिडेंट विद यू एंड अराउंड यू. सो उसमें कम्युनिकेशन का बहुत बड़ा रोल है. सो उसके बारे में आज हम पढ़ेंगे. सो टीचेबल पॉइंट्स इसमें क्या हैं, एक तो कम्युनिकेशन प्रोसेस देखेंगे, और ये मैंने क्लास में काफी डिटेल में समझाया है कि व्हाई इज इट इम्पोर्टेंट फॉर अस टू अंडरस्टैंड द स्टेप बाय स्टेप अप्रोच टू इफेक्टिव कम्युनिकेशन. एंड द रीजन इज, otherwise, if somebody looks at you and says, oh, the communication is not working, we usually in our own personal capacity tend to go back to thinking that my speaking skills need to be better. So हमारे पास में तो जो हमारी वो vocal skills हैं, our ability to articulate, जो हमारी writing skills हैं, हम तो उन्हीं की तरफ जा सकते हैं ना. So immediate first reaction यही होता है कि भाई मैं कोई लैंग्वेज का प्रोग्राम कर लूँ, या मैं टोस्ट मास्टर कर लूँ, स्पीकिंग का प्रोग्राम कर लूँ, क्योंकि वही मेरा भी रिएक्शन था. इंग्लिश पहले ही अच्छी थी, आईसीएसई से की हुई थी इंग्लिश, और वो भी उस टाइम से जब आईसीएसई का फाइनल 2 साल का होता था. तो एज यू कैन इमेजिन, शेक्सपियर भी पढ़ा हुआ था, इंग्लिश लिटरेचर काफी हेवीली पढ़ा हुआ था, ग्रामर काफी हेवी पढ़ी थी. एंड येट व्हेन आई केम हियर, माय फर्स्ट रिएक्शन after I started getting a little bit of a pushback was to go and join Toastmaster, which in its own way helped me a lot, but that should not have been the way for me to solve the problem. Then we'll look at nonverbal communication, basically looking at it and understanding that in the whole paradigm of communication, it's not just the spoken words, it's not just the written words, it's not just the communication that happens through the language. There's a whole element of being able to understand the nonverbal cues, but most importantly, then how do you incorporate them into your own communication style. आपको ये इसमें आपको बहुत कॉन्शियसनेस चाहिए कि जो आपके नॉन वर्बल क्यूज हैं, जो आपके नॉन वर्बल मैसेजेस हैं, जो आप लोगों के साथ में छोड़ रहे हो, उनका उनके ऊपर क्या इम्पैक्ट हो रहा है, सोशली, फिजिकली, साइकोलॉजिकली. एंड उसमें से सारे में से आपकी जो कम्युनिकेशन है उसमें और ज्यादा स्ट्रेंथ आती है. एंड देन फाइनली ओवरकमिंग बैरियर्स. सो व्हाट आर सम ऑफ द कम्युनिकेशन प्रॉब्लम्स एंड व्हाट कैन बी द बैरियर्स फॉर इट. So the communication process is 5 things. in this case, it is the sender, the message, the channel, the receiver, and the feedback. So it goes from sender to the message, to channel, to receiver, to feedback. And then the other two things are then the modulating influences that there are. So it's very important for you to understand that, because I guess I shouldn't have moved my thing over here. So it's very important for you to understand that, because um, uh, उन 5 कंपोनेंट्स को समझने के साथ में ही आपको फिर पता चलेगा कि अगर अगर देयर समथिंग दैट नीड्स टू बी फिक्स्ड, देन हाउ, where and how do you fix it? So sender is obviously the person who is the source of the message. The message is, it actually constitutes the actual content. The channel is the medium through which the message is sent. The receiver is the individual getting it, and the feedback is what the receiver is sending back to you, the content that is coming back to you. So between the 5 of them, you have the communications process, or the 5 important components of. So when you run into a challenge, you have to visit each one of them to see where the problem is. So environmental influences and noise. Environmental influences, उनका जो main impact होता है वो content के ऊपर और channel के ऊपर होता है, and noise is anything that is leading to the thinning of the message, which is leading to the message actually getting corrupted. Or the efficiency of the message going down. So उसमें क्या है कि आपको, especially if you are controlling the communication pathway, or you are in charge of the communication process, it's your responsibility to make sure that the noise is as little as possible. And noise can come in any way or form. It can come in the form of something technically being wrong with the channel. It can come in the form of somebody actually being disruptive as an individual. It can come from the environment in terms of uh, alternate messages, which, because they have very low informational content, or they are actually um, in direct conflict with your message, they can add noise to it. So वो सब आपको as a leader in a communication process देखना पड़ता है. इसका एक और aspect जो leadership के point of view से है, that aspect, the other aspect for it is if somebody comes to you in your leadership role and talks to you about how they're having a really tough time communicating, either with an individual or with a group of individual or in general, then it's very important, like, you're not going to open this up and start talking to them about it from a theoretical point of view कि बताओ भाई sender का क्या करें, बताओ भाई message का क्या करें, channel का क्या करें, receiver. This is for you to make sense of where the challenge is, and what you're going to do in terms of finding a solution by addressing it. The other thing is by looking at it from a perspective of these 5+2 elements, it also allows you to start breaking the problem into smaller chunks. So to really look at it and say, so as an example, in my case, the first thing I always look at is the message. So I will start with the content of the message to see if there's a problem with that. And if I don't see a problem with that, then I would go to the noise and the environment before I go to the channel. Then I will revisit the feedback, if the depending upon where the problem has been communicated to me or brought forward to me. If it is coming from the receiver, uh, then I will look at what feedback they are sending. If it's coming from the sender, I look at what feedback are they getting and how they're internalizing it, how they're understanding it. So again, ये theoretical concept नहीं है सिर्फ, इसके practical considerations हैं, और आपको वो सारे practical considerations in your leadership journey, you have to look at these practical considerations that can only come from you understanding the different steps in it. So this is something that I have just explained to you, that the message originates with the sender, then it finds its way through the channel to the receiver, and the sender gets feedback one way or another. So some people would look at you and say, but I didn't get a feedback. Yes, you did. Even if you did not receive an explicit message back, even a tacit feedback has been sent to you, if the person has not sent you any feedback, which is, listen, I'm okay with the message. So you've received some feedback. Always, you will always receive some feedback. And then we will talk about the non-verbal cues and other things, and you will understand that the feedback can also come from not having received a message. It can actually come from just the way the person reacts to it, and the way the person is after you've sent the message to them. And the environment and the noise are influencing factors, moderating factors, and you would look at them from that perspective. So understanding this model is also very important, especially when it comes to tourism and hospitality from a client point of view, from a customer point of view. Because if a customer has come back and they're not happy with communication, again, instead of just looking at it and saying, John, why have you made this customer unhappy, which will make you a poor leader, which will make you a poor manager, you will actually sit down and ask John, if John was the originator of the message or the sender of the message, saying, John, can you please walk me through on what you did with the content? How did you create that content? What's the content you sent? Which channel did you use? What's some of the input you received from the customer, and what was the process of it? If there's been more than one, then can you walk me through the actual sequence of those messages for me to understand it? And then finally, it would be important for you to understand the environment and noise. So let me take a very simple example of it. A customer comes to you directly, you're a manager, senior manager, leader, and is really unhappy with not having been communicated with properly. And when you ask John, you actually realize that unknown to John at that time, there was some actual physical noise in the environment. And for that, it was not a matter of that John did not take the time to send that message. It actually got caught up in that noise. Or an environmental issue could be that John, unknown to John, the message is still caught in his outbox because the internet went down, and unfortunately, John did not have the technical capability to understand that if outbox is showing one message unsent, that message is still sitting with them. So what happens here is that instead of just coming down heavy on John, you're still gonna walk John through what he should have done or what they should have done. But what you're gonna do is you're going to, as a leader, you're going to have them understand what it means to see a one against an outbox, that there's a message still waiting to be sent. So elements of personal communication, the book that we have in the course quotes uh, Dr. Albert Mehrabian on his 738-55% rule. I actually find it very very powerful when I'm using it to work with the students. Before this, I'd not seen the numbers on these broken down like that. But through my experience, my 25 plus years of experience, I would actually contend that I can actually relate to it. I would contend that that's actually quite true. 7% spoken words, 38% voice and tone, and 55% body language. Between us, the one thing that I've had to really work on is the 38%. Uh, why? Because I am a confident individual. I like to think I'm extremely well read. So there's a confirmation bias that often creeps into my voice and tone. Uh, I also often tend to be, fairly confident about what I'm saying, because I like to believe that I'm saying it having thought it out, you know. So that's just my leadership style too. But it has consequences if you're not conscious about it. Yeah. And the 55% on body language, that just has to do with the things like your posture, things like how you're looking at people, whether you're looking at them in the eye when you're talking to them. So there's very specific examples of what constitutes that. But the most important thing is to understand the 7%, the 38%, and the 55%. And the aha in this is that 93% of communication has got nothing to do with your ability to speak a language comfortably and confidently, or being very lucid in your language skills, because a full 93% of it is stuff that is the wraparound stuff that around that message that you're good at because of your mastery of the language. So the next is hearing versus listening. And the focus again here is on listening, like being able to make a case for that what we want to be doing, both in our professional capacity, but also especially in our leadership journey, is to be developing the habit of listening rather than hearing. Hearing is casual, listening is intentional. Hearing is, as it says here, accidental, involuntary, effortless. Listening is focused, voluntary, intentional. Listening involves you developing very specific and conscious skills to internalize what's coming your way, to contextualize it, to take a moment to really understand in your, not only in your capacity but also in the context of what the broader conversation is happening. It also is about you thinking about the consequences of upfront, thinking ahead, but most importantly, that you're creating the space in your head to give them your full attention. आपकी पूरी अटेंशन उस टाइम पे आपके आसपास वाले लोगों के साथ में होनी चाहिए. अगर आप ये चीज अपनी लीडरशिप कैपेसिटी में अपने आसपास के लोगों को देते हैं, तो ट्रस्ट मी दैट यू गोइंग टू बी वेरी पॉपुलर. By default, most people are okay with you making mistakes as a leader, as long as they feel that you're giving them the opportunity to hear them out. अगर आप वो अपॉर्चुनिटी उनको दे रहे हैं, then 9 out of 10 people are going to be fine with your decision, even if that decision or your communication back to them, even if it is not 100% in alignment with what their aspirations were. क्योंकि आपने एटलीस्ट उनके लिए वो एक कंफर्ट क्रिएट कर दी है कि भाई, तुम जो भी मुझसे बात कर रहे हो, no matter how I feel about it, but in this moment of time, I will give you the safety and the security, as also the respect and courtesy of you feeling that you have my full attention, my undivided attention. So listening is absolutely important, and ये एक हैबिट फॉर्मिंग एक्टिविटी है. जब मैंने आपको बताया कि मैं 15 सेशन में आपको कुछ कॉल टू एक्शंस, कुछ वेरी स्पेसिफिक थिंग्स टू वर्क विद दूंगा, तो उसमें एक एलिमेंट होगा द हैबिट ऑफ developing active listening. Yeah. So active listening, paraphrasing, if somebody is talking to you, then, instead of just going with what they are telling you, you take the time to paraphrase it back to them. So for example, somebody is saying, listen, this shift has been killing me, and you know I've not been able to sleep properly, and they have given you a whole lot of input. Their message is very um, you know comprehensive on how the shift is disrupting their life. Then once you've heard it, just taking a moment of conscious thinking where it's obvious to them that you've been listening carefully, and just paraphrasing it back to them. So let's say the example here again is with John, and they have taken the time to bring something forward to you like that. Then just paraphrasing and saying, John, if I understand this correctly, the last month and a half has not been easy because you find yourself a little bit at odds with what's going on. So I'm थोड़ा paraphrase कर दिया. आपके paraphrase करने से emphasis आ गया जॉन के लिए कि आप उसकी बात समझ गए हो. Eye contact, I'll explain again in the context of eye contact is just आप अपना focus दे रहे हैं. So when you are creating that uh, undivided attention for John, the best way for you to show it to John is by giving John a good eye contact. ताकि जॉन को पता चले कि भाई डिस्ट्रैक्टेड नहीं है मनु, आप देख रहे हैं उनकी तरफ, you're looking at them in the eye, or softly. You cannot be glowering at them. So good eye contact, focus, acknowledgement. So something as simple as nodding your head. How many times do you find yourself in a conversation with somebody, and then you see somebody nodding their head and you feel just good about it? Like, that's especially true in communication if you're on a stage. So you will hear that most often, that one of the biggest fears that people have is a fear of public speaking. I do a lot of public speaking. Up to it's almost uh, you know it comes to me by default. It's almost second nature to me to speak from a stage. अब सोचना भी नहीं पड़ता ज़्यादा. But still, even after all my years of experience, having been an MC or a moderator in front of groups of thousands of people, um, verbal acknowledgement still matters a lot. When you're on the stage and you're in the glare of that one light that's on your face, and you can look into the audience and you see a few people nodding when you're saying something, especially when you make a stupid joke. It just raises your belief, it raises your confidence. So respect, you can show respect in multiple ways: eye contact, focus, paraphrasing. Acknowledgement go all towards that too, but you can also be very intentional in saying something very sincere and respectful, clarifying if something is amiss. uh, Ask for a clarification right away, because again, that tells the person you've been listening intently, they have your full attention. And finally, engage. If you find that the person is starting to stumble a little bit, or is starting to lose their thought a little bit, or they're starting to get distracted even in their own communication, engage with them. Do something to just break that cycle right there. Yeah, I usually will look at the person and ask them if they wanted a glass of water, if that was the situation. But otherwise, also, I will find a nice, comfortable, polite way of, um, you know, maybe through a paraphrasing, like just do an intervention very quickly, and that gives them a sense of that engagement. Yeah. So this all is what I've already looked at a little bit already. Accepting sender's figure of speech. Yeah, if somebody is saying something to you, don't go for always for the literal meaning on it. Somebody a silly example, somebody says that Manu is making me run in circles. It does not mean that I've made them run in circles around the block. They're just saying that they're confused, or they are having to repeat something without really getting the sense of why they are doing it and what they're doing, or that they're not getting to any outcome, and they find themselves now caught in a loop. So uh, try to get the message behind the figure of speech. I actually know of many occasions when somebody actually took a lot of offense to the figure of speech. It's like, oh, why did he talk like this? तुमने ये बात की क्यों? और अरे वो तो यार तुम्हें कुछ समझाने के लिए वो बात कर रहा था, तो उसको don't get too caught up on कि नहीं तुमने तो मेरी बेइज्जती कर दी. It was an example. Take it as an example. Move on. Your job is not to judge them on something that they used just to make a case. So move on. Paraphrasing and reflective listening. Repeat in own words what the sender says, feels, and means. Minimizing distractions. So if you're going to give them that undivided attention, your complete focus, minimize distraction, put your phone away, have them understand. Actually, even do it quite consciously and quite visually. Like, take your phone, uh, look at them and say, hold on, John, can you just give me a second to put my phone on vibrate, because I do not want to be interrupted in this conversation. It gives the other person that respect, that sense of uh, feeling special, that they are entitled to. Asking questions rather than making conclusive statements. So again, if you've been able to parse through what you've heard, if you've been able to reflect on it, if you've been able to analyze it, do not feel the need to make conclusive statements in a conversation. In fact, if you want a validation of something, or if you want to confirm something, try to ask that as a question. So uh, as an example, John has mentioned some problems about a colleague. Like, don't blurt out saying, so John, what you're telling me is that you know Jill here is not doing their work. That's not. So instead, if you really want to establish what you've heard, like, ask them a question. So John, why do you think that Jill is not putting in their best effort into the work, as you're articulating it? So you're still getting to that same point, but you've not introduced any negativity. You've not used your position and your authority to introduce any kind of a bias into the conversation. क्योंकि अगर जैसे ही आप एक conclusive statement दे देते हो, so depending upon आपकी क्या statement है, या तो जॉन बहुत खुश हो जाएगा या बहुत डिप्रेस हो जाएगा. So आप वो दोनों आपके इंटेंट नहीं है. अगर स्पेशली अगर वो कॉन्वर्सेशन हैवी कॉन्वर्सेशन है, उसके बीच में कुछ कॉन्फ्लिक्ट है, उसके बीच में कुछ हॉस्टिलिटी है, तब तो आपने बिल्कुल भी कोई कंक्लूसिव स्टेटमेंट नहीं देनी. आपने आपने पूरी बात सुननी है. आपने कुछ भी अगर कंफर्म करना है, तो आपने पोलाइट क्वेश्चंस पूछने हैं, इसके बाद में यू गोना मूव ऑन, allowing sender to finish his or her sentence. That's very important, especially जब आप एक position of authority में, अगर आप एक leadership role में हो, अगर आप एक leadership role में हो, और you have to understand the power dynamics in that communication. The power dynamics is you're the person with the authority, and the person is already going to be a little bit overwhelmed and is already a bit in awe of you when they're talking to you. So us case mein, let's say they are taking a pause to just collect their thoughts. Don't try to finish the sentence for them. Don't also try to bring in a hustle. ऐसा नहीं उनको पुश करना शुरू कर दो सॉफ्टली कि अरे तुमने ये सोचा है, वो सोचा है. So let them finish their sentence, and after or let them finish their thoughts. When there is an opportunity for you to put in your own perspective, then you do that, but not leaving them mid sentence. दूसरी बात उसके बीच में जो एक बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट बात ये है कि जब आप उनको थोड़ा पॉज का मौका देते हो, एंड उस पॉज के साथ में आप भी पेशेंट हो, often you will feel if somebody is getting distracted or somebody is starting to move away from what they're communicating, if you give them just that little bit of space, it allows them to recalibrate very quick, regroup their thoughts. So उसमें क्या होता है कि जब वो recalibrate कर लेंगे, अपने आप को regroup कर लेंगे, तो आपको अपनी उस पोजीशन ऑफ अथॉरिटी में उनको करेक्ट करने की भी जरूरत नहीं पड़ेगी. दे विल सेल्फ करेक्ट देमसेल्व्स. सो that's something that's very important for you to know. So types of non-verbal communication, environment and setting, interpersonal distance, इसके बारे में हम बात करेंगे. posture, आप कैसे खड़े हैं, आपके हाथ खुले हुए हैं, आप warm posture है, अगर आपके पैर closed हैं, आप किसी को face कर रहे हैं, you're already sending them a tacit message that I do not want to be here. I don't know why I'm here. So that's never good. Hand gestures, depending upon आपके hand gestures क्या हैं, like a complete lack of hand gestures is not good, but too many hand gestures, especially hand gestures that are very energetic, जिसमें it can almost be understood on the other side as that you're being a bit over aggressive. वो भी आपको consciously balance करने हैं. Facial expressions and eye contact, like rolling your eyes, raising your eyebrows, playing with your hair, not looking at the person. Those are all very negative non-verbal communication pieces. Voice quality, आपकी वॉइस की पिच क्या है, टोन क्या है. एजी इरिटेटेड वॉइस never gets you anywhere. Now, the other thing about communication which has to be understood is, अगर आप अपने किसी एक कम्युनिकेशन के एपिसोड में जहां पे आप किसी के साथ में खड़े होकर कम्युनिकेट कर रहे हो, if you do not bring that communication process to its natural conclusion, you've just postponed it for another time. So let's say you were talking to somebody for 15 minutes, and in that you cannot control these non-verbal things, and in the process you've left the person dejected and wondering why in the first place they even tried to talk to you. Then you've just postponed that conversation to be have had another time somewhere else. So that's very important for you to understand कि आप अपना टाइम भी वेस्ट कर रहे हो, उनका टाइम भी वेस्ट कर रहे हो, अगर आप उसके बारे में बड़ी प्रैक्टिकल कंसिडरेशन भी लेने की कोशिश करते हैं. पर्सनल अपीयरेंस, हाउ यू अपीयर, मतलब कोई आपके साथ में बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट बात करने आया और आप अपने पजामे में उनको मिल रहे हो, तो दे आर नॉट गोना फील like you're giving them the right importance, attention paid to the other person. So if this like वही, अगर कोई पॉज ले रहा है, अगर कोई खांस रहा है, आप उनके लिए क्या कर रहे हो, that's very important. Yeah. So इन सब चीज़ों को देखें. अगर आपको इन चीज़ों की प्रैक्टिस करनी है, रोल प्लेइंग इज अ वेरी गुड वे ऑफ डूइंग इट. Like it's often the best if you pick up somebody in your immediate environment, a family member, a good friend, and you role play with them. But role play करने का फायदा तभी है अगर आप अगले आदमी को आउटकम बिल्कुल क्लियर बताएं. Like role playing is only effective if you approach that person with a clear articulation of that this is what I'm trying to fix, and with what you're trying to fix, then you go about it, and then the person is being very honest and being very candid with you, and giving you that input that needs to come from that role playing. And same thing for mirroring. Like अगर आपने कहा कि भाई मैं मिरर के सामने खड़े होकर प्रैक्टिस करूंगा, पर आप प्रैक्टिस सिर्फ अपनी नेगेटिव कम्युनिकेशन की कर रहे हैं, तो वो तो फिर आपकी नेगेटिव कम्युनिकेशन और ज्यादा प्रोमिनेंट हो जाएगी। प्रैक्टिस करने से पहले इस चीज की क्लैरिटी होनी बहुत जरूरी है कि भाई मैं फिक्स क्या करने की कोशिश कर रहा हूँ, ताकि यू कैन लुक आउट फॉर दोस थिंग्स व्हेन यू आर लुकिंग एट योरसेल्फ इन द मिरर. So posture erect, self-confidence slumpish, low self-confidence, leaning forward suggests interest. So if you'll see, मैं भी बात करते करते थोड़ा थोड़ा आगे हो जाता हूँ. Leaning backward, you know what? I don't care. तुम कौन हो? Why are you here? That's the kind of an attitude that it suggests you have when you are leaning backwards. Openness of arms or legs indicates caring. Closed posture shows opposite. So, like for example, just crossing your arms in front of you and sitting uh, over in your place like that, in a meeting or even in a communication, immediately suggests that you're close to what's happening. अब some people will say भाई यार हम तो बैठते ऐसे हैं, like this is the way I sit, this is my style. Well, then the news for you is leadership takes an intentionality. Leadership requires for you to consciously move in certain directions and do certain things. So please, वो जो आप अपने ये वाली जो आदत है इसको तोड़ें, क्योंकि ये आपकी जो लीडरशिप की इफेक्टिवनेस है उसको कम करेगी. और आपने अगर इफेक्टिव लीडर बनना है तो आदतें तोड़ना सबसे ज्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट है. You have to get into the habit of breaking your habits, and the more you practice that, the better you're going to be. So social distance, I mean distance का जो concept है वो समझना बहुत जरूरी है कि 4 different distances होते हैं. सबसे close distance 45 centimeters तक इंटीमेट डिस्टेंस होता है. इंटीमेट डिस्टेंस के बाद में पर्सनल डिस्टेंस आ जाता है. पर्सनल के बाद में सोशल, और सोशल के बाद में पब्लिक डिस्टेंस आ जाता है. पब्लिक डिस्टेंस 3.6 मीटर से शुरू होता है. तो इसकी भी क्या रेलेवेंस है? इसकी रेलेवेंस फ्रॉम बोथ साइड्स है. एक तो ये है कि आपको एज अ लीडर अपने आसपास के लोगों को बिल्कुल क्लियर रखना पड़ेगा कि भाई तुमने मुझसे कैसा डिस्टेंस रखना है, तुम कहाँ पे बिलोंग करते हो इन द हायरार्की ऑफ. Are you just somebody I know? Are you an acquaintance? Are you a colleague? Are you somebody that I'm close to, a friend? Are you a family member? Where do they stand for, so that the appropriateness of the distance can be there. But the flip side is more important, that as a leader you have to know when you have to be in a certain space with somebody. So in my case, intimate distance is always a no, unless मैं किसी को शाबाशी दे रहा हूँ, unless मैं किसी को कोई चीज दे रहा हूँ, unless किसी की पीठ थपका रहा हूँ, किसी को आशीर्वाद दे रहा हूँ, like if I'm giving somebody my blessings, if I'm giving somebody a pat on the back, then the intimate distance makes sense. Um, this is one thing I had to learn. In my Punjabi culture, it was very common to hug everybody, and it was natural for me to shake hands with them and then start getting into a hug with them. And politely everybody gave me a hug till somebody came along and said, "Bhai, yaar, कुछ सोचो, सबके साथ जफ्फियां डाली जा रहे हो कि." तो कभी ये सोचा कि उनको कैसे फील होता है? मतलब मेरे इन माय हेड, हाउ कैन समबडी नॉट लाइक अ हग? I love a hug. So of course, if I love a hug, everybody should love a hug. But then again, that's the difference between starting to think about it consciously versus just letting things happen. So intimate distance में बहुत कम, personal distance में भी कम. Social distance is what typically I maintain between me and other people. Unless and until there's a paucity of space. अगर अब आपके साथ में कोई बैठा हुआ है ट्रेन में, तो फिर तो आप सोशल डिस्टेंस नहीं ना करेंगे, पर्सनल डिस्टेंस पे बैठे हुए हैं. And public distance is the distance. So what's the role and importance of understanding it? कि आप अपना प्लान कर सकते हैं कि जब आप लोगों के अराउंड हैं तो आप कॉन्शियसली कैसे डिस्टेंस मेंटेन करेंगे. रिलेशनशिप बिल्डिंग एंड इंटरपर्सनल कम्युनिकेशन. सो ये एक बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग फ्रेमवर्क है. इस फ्रेमवर्क को मैं एक्चुअली बहुत पसंद करता हूँ, बिकॉज इसके इसके दो इम्पैक्ट्स हैं. सो द फ्रेमवर्क इज, एक एक्सिस पे आप डोमिनेंट सबऑर्डिनेट को प्लॉट करते हो, दूसरे एक्सिस पे वार्म एंड कोल्ड को करते हो. सो डोमिनेंट सबऑर्डिनेट इज उनका स्टाइल क्या है, वार्म एंड कोल्ड उनकी पर्सनैलिटी कैसी है. सो अगर कोई डोमिनेंट और वार्म है, so that lends itself to a personal relationship. So वो relationship is going to be more in the personal end. अगर कोई dominant है और cold है, then that relationship is going to be an impersonal relationship. So अगर कोई subordinate है और warm है तो वो supportive है, और अगर कोई subordinate और cold है तो वो accepting है. So बेसिकली इसमें आइडिया क्या है? आइडिया ये है इस हाउ डू यू यूज स्टफ लाइक दिस? इट्स नॉट जस्ट थियोरेटिकल, इट्स एक्चुअली क्वाइट पावरफुल. आप अपने आप को इन डायमेंशंस पे देखते हैं कि भाई मैं कैसा हूँ, मैं डोमिनेंट हूँ और वार्म हूँ, या मैं डोमिनेंट हूँ या कोल्ड हूँ, या मैं सबॉर्डिनेट हूँ और वार्म हूँ, या मैं सबॉर्डिनेट हूँ और कोल्ड हूँ. सो डिपेंडिंग अपॉन वेयर यू आर एंड हाउ you are and you're being honest about it, you can actually now, when you meet somebody or you're going to meet somebody or spend time with somebody, you can actually now plot it and say, listen, this is the way it's going to work between me and them. So as an example, if both people are dominant and cold, so they are in the impersonal side of things, that as a leader is the time when you will take somebody with you who is not that, because otherwise that's just two people who are very impersonal sitting in a room talking to each other. So इसका यूज क्या है? इसका यूज यही है कि आप एक, there's a lot that is said about having a customer profile, कि आपने कस्टमर का प्रोफाइल जब तक नहीं है तो आप अपनी सेल्स एंड मार्केटिंग एंड सेल्स में कैसे जा सकते हैं? द सेम इज ट्रू फॉर योर लीडरशिप एंगेजमेंट्स एंड योर कम्युनिकेशन टू. अगर आपको अगले आदमी का प्रोफाइल ही नहीं पता, इफ यू आर नॉट एबल टू प्लॉट द प्रोफाइल ऑफ द पर्सन इन फ्रंट ऑफ यू, then you have a problem. Yeah. So what are the strategies for overcoming communication problems? I think this is the second last or the last concept that we're going to look at. So take the time to understand your receiver. For example, this could be an example of how you understand your receiver by really plotting them on the elements of personal communication. So understanding the strategies then becomes easier if you already have frameworks and models and tools with which to work with. Understanding the receiver, minimizing defensive communication. अगर कुछ कहना शुरू किया किसी ने तो डोंट गेट इनटू अ डिफेंसिव मोड. अगर खुद कर रहे हो तो अगला आदमी पहला क्वेश्चन पूछता है एंड यू स्टार्ट गेटिंग इनटू अ डिफेंसिव मोड, it doesn't work. So you cannot get defensive with somebody who is communicating with you and get defensive in your own shoes when you're communicating with somebody else. Using multiple channels. अगर एक चैनल नहीं काम कर रहा, अगर आप ईमेल भेज रहे हो और किसी का रिस्पॉन्स नहीं आ रहा, तो maybe it's time to pick up the phone and call them. That's the simplistic of the most simplistic of simple examples I can give here. But the channels could also be that you're trying to communicate with them through your family, and that's not working. And now you would try to communicate with them through another channel, which would still be a personal channel, but maybe it's not your family. Yeah. Providing verbal and non-verbal feedback. So consciously, आप दोनों feedback देते हैं, verbal and non-verbal. So verbal, of course, in language, and non-verbal in how you react and how you react during the communication and after the communication. Displaying a positive attitude, we talked about it. Empower the person, make the person feel comfortable and confident. Displaying a positive attitude is all about that. The person should feel like they can approach you. Engaging in persuasive communication. So especially अगर आपको किसी को convince करना है, आपको you need to have a good understanding of where they are in their mental space, where they are at in terms of their ability to receive your communication, and then you bring the communication to them accordingly. Active listening, we already talked about it. Listening and hearing are difference. What's the difference between listening and hearing? Preparing for stressful communication. When you know it's going to be stressful, you need to have a strategy in place. So in some cases, like I'll take a very practical case. If there's certain people around me that I know are very difficult when it comes to communicating with them, especially when it is a communication about something that they need to be made aware of, in that sense of raising their own work or their performance, then something as simple as a chocolate sometimes help. I would not go in and give them a false compliment, but I will go in bearing something that I know that is going to put a smile on their face before I get into the conversation. So that's again a very simplistic way of making a case for कि आपको stressful communication को anticipate करें. I think the more important thing is that you have to anticipate when you expect a certain communication to be stressful, and you have to be prepared for it. As recently as in my class on Monday, I didn't do that properly. And I've taken that very strongly for myself as feedback. मुझे immediate feedback मिल गई because one of the students got emotional about it. अब मैं इसके बारे में सोच सकता हूँ कि क्यों emotional हो गया. दूसरी बात ये है कि I cannot be a professor where I look at all my students as as people who are in my care, as an extension of my own immediate group, and then not care for them. I might have been right in my message, but there's definitely something that I have to look at in terms of those 5 pieces that what happened. Because The thing is, even though the message was correct, मैसेज बिल्कुल ठीक था, और वो मैसेज कम्युनिकेट होना भी था बिकॉज उनके अपने भले के लिए था. अ, अगर वो मैसेज किसी भी तरह से इम्पैक्ट हो गया, whether by my tone or the channel I picked up, or the manner in which I carried the conversation, then it's not going to achieve its outcome. Because outcome तो इसमें केयर थी ना, care for them. And if that doesn't come through कि भाई मैं I am in my role, in my body, I care for all of you and I care for you deeply, your success is very important to me, uh, your investment in your education being done properly and it working for you is very important to me. And अगर मैंने वही नहीं communicate किया and on the contrary stress create किया, तो then you know what, at that point of time things stop with me. I have to take blame for it, I have to take responsibility for it, and I have to be accountable for it. So और वो मैंने किया. Only I know कि मैंने उसके बारे में अब कितना सोचा है, and there are certain things that I'm already going to be bringing in. So actually, that's a real example of something that happened this week to make a case for it. Meta communication. So meta communication is context. So अगर किसी से कोई बात करनी है तो उसका कॉन्टेक्स्ट पहले क्रिएट करें. सो ट्राई, मे बी यू हैव टू कम्युनिकेट बिफोर यू एक्चुअली कम्युनिकेट द मैसेज. सो एज एन एग्जांपल, अगर मुझे पता है कि मैं किसी अपने कॉलीग को एक नोट भेजूंगा जिसमें मैं उनको उनकी रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी के बारे में बता रहा हूँ, उनसे मेरे को कोई काम है, तो देन मे बी दैट इज नॉट द फर्स्ट ईमेल दैट दे गेट. मे बी आई विल पिक अप द फोन एंड आल्सो गिव देम द कॉन्टेक्स्ट टू इट, सेइंग लिसन, John, there's this thing coming through and unfortunately capacity nahi hai, but more importantly you're the only one who can do it. So actually uska bhi main aapko ek example de deta hu, ye bhi aaj hi hua. So I have a project that is coming through, jis project mein mere ko mere ek colleague ki zarurat hai, par wo busy hai. So इमीडिएट रिएक्शंस उसका और उसके इमीडिएट बॉस का है कि वो तो ऑलरेडी बिजी है तो वो कैसे करेगा. तो आज जब बात हो रही थी तो मैंने उससे फिर पूछा, मैंने बोला कि भाई इज इट समथिंग दैट यू थिंक यू कैन डू. एंड हिज क्वेश्चन देन वाज दैट आई एम कंफ्यूज्ड अबाउट what's the engagement like, is it a full 5 days a week. So I looked at him and said, no, it's going to be 40 to 60%. So I'm looking at 2 to 3 days of your work for a period of time. So wo meri responsibility communicate karne ki, that's the context. Because now I can see why he was unwilling, because usko lag raha tha ki bhai मैं 5 दिन काम करूंगा इस नई चीज पे, तो मैं अपना काम कब करूंगा, ठीक है ना. दिस इज नॉट समथिंग ही कैन डू फ्रॉम द साइड ऑफ हिज डेस्क. So then the other context that I gave him, actually I could see क्योंकि मुझे immediately positive confirmation मिल गई with the way non-verbally he was reacting to it. I told him, I said, listen John, तुम बेशक करो या ना करो वो तुम्हारा डिसीजन है, एंड फ्रैंकली आई कैन गो एंड हायर समबडी फॉर द ड्यूरेशन ऑफ द प्रोजेक्ट, पर जिसको भी मैं हायर करूंगा तुम मुझे बताओ कि उसको कौन ट्रेन करेगा, और मोर इंपॉर्टेंटली तुम मुझे बताओ कि उस बंदे को ट्रेन करने के लिए कितना टाइम लगेगा. सो लेट्स से कि प्रोजेक्ट 6 महीने का है, सो दैट वुड बी 24 to 25 weeks. You tell me somebody coming from the outside who has absolutely no understanding of it, उसको कौन ट्रेन करेगा. सो पूरी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन में वो कौन होगा. एंड देन ही लुक्ड एट मी, सेड I'll have to be me. So अब मुझे बताओ, do you want to actually put in all that work and still not take any credit for actually leading that work? So फिर मैंने अगला पूछा, अब मुझे बताओ कि उसको ट्रेन करने में तुम्हें कितना टाइम लगेगा. एंड ही लुक्ड एट मी एंड ही सेड इट विल एट लीस्ट टेक मी 2 to 3 days. फॉर हाउ लॉन्ग? एंड आई सेड एट लीस्ट 10 to 12 weeks. या 24 weeks का तो प्रोजेक्ट है, उसके अगर आधा तुमने काम कर ही लेना, देन व्हाई डू यू वांट समबडी फ्रॉम आउटसाइड जिसको इस चीज की जरूरत नहीं अपने प्रोफाइल पे, टेकिंग द क्रेडिट फॉर इट. तुम लो ना क्रेडिट, तुम्हारी ग्रोथ है. This is something that will actually be useful for you, and these are things I didn't even have to say out loud to that person then. So I know for a fact that the meta part of that communication, with John understanding what is it that is involved in what I am going to be communicating with him more formally on, तो वो communication थोड़ा easy हो गया. Recognizing gender differences in communication style, इसके ऊपर तो मैं एक पूरा 8 घंटे का लेक्चर डाल सकता हूँ. In my class, I shared this as a personal example. I'll share it here too. For half of my life, my sister and I are very close. She's my younger sister. She's my best friend. She's somebody that I absolutely am in awe of for her intellect. She's one of the sharpest, smartest people that I know in the world. And yet, it took me half of my life to understand that a whole lot of my communication with her was coming from a position of taking her for granted and not necessarily really treating her as an individual who also had her own perspectives, who had her own decision points that needed for me to treat her more empathically, more active listening. So uske case mein jo, if one thing that I can say is that I've spent the last half of my life getting better at listening rather than hearing. Because if somebody asks me who has actually been at the receiving end of you being in a hearing mode rather than the listening mode, I would say my sister. But in the spirit of it's all about breaking habits, I've been wanting to break that habit, and I am on a journey to break that habit. So symptoms of stress physical hote hain, emotional hote hain, behavioral hote hain. I won't go into the details of it, but when you're communicating, you or the people in front of you could have any one of these signs. The idea again behind putting them on the screen is that in your own leadership role, in your own leadership position, in your own shoes, you should have a way of being able to recognize them. uh, इसमें सबसे ज़्यादा मुश्किल बिहेवियरल और इमोशनल होता है. फिजिकल तो आपको फिर भी दिख जाता है. सो absolutely keep an eye out for it. Like if you find somebody actually disengaging, uh, somebody being very quiet, not somebody glaring at you, uh, like somebody who's just started like skipping conversation. So एक behavioral pattern आपको आ रहा है जहाँ पे आपको पता चल गया कि this person is disengaged, either they are uncomfortable, unke discomfort has come to a point where they just do not even want to communicate. Then as a leader it is your responsibility. And same thing for emotional. If you see some triggers happening over and over again, then as a leader you need to take cognizance. So um, safety, I've been talking about safety. As a leader, it's most important for you to give them that safety. So what is the goal of dialogue? The goal of dialogue is to create shared meaning. Communication is all about creating a shared meaning in the safety of the environment that you create for your people. So as a leader, वो आपकी सबसे बड़ी responsibility है, safety. You have to create a safe and secure place, a place where they can come and be themselves and express themselves and do whatever it is that they need to do to grow. वो ना, a rising tide raises all boats. Yeah. So आप as a leader, ये आपकी responsibility है कि सिर्फ organization ना grow करे. Organization है भी क्या? ऑर्गेनाइजेशन प्रिंसिपली इज, उसका डीएनए तो पीपल है ना, लोग हैं जो उसको लेके जा रहे हैं. और मेरे अपने लाइफ के 25+ साल के एक्सपीरियंस में मैंने सिर्फ एक ही बात सीखी है कि आप सक्सेस आइडिया पे नहीं बना सकते, आप सक्सेस सिर्फ लोगों पे बना सकते हैं. अगर लोग नहीं हैं तो एग्जीक्यूट नहीं होगा, और अगर लोग खुश नहीं हैं तो बिल्कुल एग्जीक्यूट नहीं होगा. एंड one of the most important reasons लोग खुश नहीं होते हैं is because they do not feel that they can communicate with you. You have to take them along. They have to feel like they are on that journey with you. So food for thought, role of non-verbal cues. मैंने पहले ही आपको बोला कि वो जो ऊपर वाला 5-7-8% है वो तो इजी पार्ट है. जो 93% है उसके ऊपर ज्यादा फोकस करें. वो उसकी इंटेंशनैलिटी बहुत जरूरी है. आज अगर आज में से कोई चीज निकली है तो दो ही होनी चाहिए. एक तो अपने नॉन वर्बल एलिमेंट्स ऑफ योर कम्युनिकेशन को ध्यान दें, और दूसरा ये जो सेफ्टी वाला कॉन्सेप्ट है कि एज अ लीडर आपकी जॉब वो सेफ्टी क्रिएट करना है. पर लोग क्या करेंगे ना, इंग्लिश की ट्रेनिंग के लिए भेज देंगे लोगों को, फ्रेंच की ट्रेनिंग के लिए भेज देंगे, बट दे वोंट थिंक अबाउट इट कि मे बी द रीजन पीपल आर नॉट एबल टू कम्युनिकेट. लाइक आई हैव अ कॉलीग जिसको सारे कहते थे कि ये कम्युनिकेट नहीं प्रॉपरली कर पा रहे हैं, और उनके ईमेल लिखने की कैपेबिलिटी पे भी क्वेश्चन होता था. अब आप देखें कितनी अच्छी ईमेल है, कितना अच्छा कम्युनिकेशन है. क्या आपने किसी को पकड़ के एक यू फिट देम इनटू अ सर्टेन मोल्ड, एंड आप अपनी उसके बाद में द वे यू गोना एंगेज विद देम, द वे यू गोना ट्रीट देम, आप उसी के अकॉर्डिंगली करते रहो कि ये तो जूनियर मोस्ट है, इनको तो है नहीं. नोबडी इवन टुक द टाइम टू अंडरस्टैंड कि दिस इज लाइक द फोर्थ और द फिफ्थ पोजीशन दैट दे आर इन. उससे पिछले 3 पोजीशन में से 2 पोजीशंस वर एक्चुअली communication heavy. So how can a person who actually made a big part of their life about communication, who actually live their professional life with communication being at the core of it. How could they not be communicating in a new place, and how could people not understand that they have the skills necessary to execute? वो इसलिए क्योंकि आप एज अ लीडर इंटरेस्ट नहीं ले रहे। एक्टिव लिसनिंग वर्सेस हियरिंग, वो हमने बात की थी। एंड देन फाइनली कम्युनिकेशन बैरियर। एज अ लीडर आपकी रोल है कि जब भी कभी कोई कम्युनिकेशन में कोई इशू आए, कोई बैरियर आए, कोई there's a gap somewhere, it's your job to come up with the strategy. Execution तो सब इकट्ठे करेंगे, पर your job as the leader to come up with the strategy, and you have to be very conscious about it, very intentional. और इसके साथ में ये मैं आपको हमेशा एक्सपोज करता हूँ, वो मेरा ईमेल है। अगला वीडियो चैप्टर 5 के बारे में होगा। टुडे वी टॉक्ड अबाउट द कम्युनिकेशन प्रोसेस, द नॉन वर्बल कम्युनिकेशन एंड ओवरकमिंग बैरियर्स। वीडियो थोड़ा लंबा हो गया क्योंकि ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट डोमेन है लीडरशिप की, बहुत ज्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट डोमेन है अबाउट कम्युनिकेशन। बट आई डिड वांट टू मेक श्योर दैट आई वाज टेकिंग द टाइम टू एक्सप्लेन इट इन बोथ इंग्लिश एंड हिंदी, बट मोर इंपॉर्टेंटली दैट आई वाज एबल टू ब्रिंग इन सम एग्जांपल्स। आई विल टेक योर लीव, एंड कोई भी क्वेश्चन हो तो मुझे किसी भी टाइम पे ईमेल भेजें at manu.sharma@lambtoncollege.ca. Send me an email, or you can leave a comment here in the video. I know I'm slowly building this channel, but my hope is one day to have people who are really interested in their growth, their professional and personal growth. Like, I've spent 20 plus years of my life looking at management literature and leadership literature and business literature. Uh, अब जहाँ पे मैं अपनी लाइफ में हूँ, मैं अपनी कोचिंग और मेंटरशिप तो करता रहूँगा, ट्रेनिंग भी करता रहूँगा, टीचिंग भी करता रहूँगा, पर वो तो एक बहुत लिमिटेड अपॉर्चुनिटी है ना। 30, 40, 50 people in a class for training, 10 to 15 people that I coach one-on-one, 10 to 15 people I mentor one-on-one. But then when I look at it, there's hundreds of millions of people who have leadership aspirations, who have a deep-rooted interest in being the leaders that this world needs. The complex adaptive problems that this world has, the complex social environmental problems that this world has, the dearth of leadership that everybody talks about, especially in the politics. How is it going to be addressed if folks like I, who've had the good fortune of being able to invest in and learn from all these leadership development experiences, are not going to come and give it back? So मेरे लिंक्डइन पे अगर आप जाएं, एक्चुअली अभी मेरे दिमाग में आया, ऑन लिंक्डइन आई एम मनु शर्मा Ottawa. I think it's linkedin.com/whatever comes in between, and then Sharma Manu. Sharma Manu is my LinkedIn handle, SHARMAMANU. If you go on my LinkedIn, you'll see that I've started releasing all of my coaching material also under open source. Why? Because I really do want to make sure कि जब तक मेरे में ये capacity है of being able to express and share and communicate, that I take every opportunity to put this out as much as possible for people who otherwise would not have the chance to learn it the way that I could. So with that, I take your leave. You take really good care. Again, channel ko subscribe karen, please. Notifications on karen. I will keep on reminding you on that, because that's the only way for me to feel encouraged that whatever I am doing actually has a lot of resonance. So with that, I take your leave, and I will be back with chapter 5 sometime within the next couple of days.